In 2009, the Christian Monitor, one of the world's most respected news brands, set out on a path towards digital transformation. They eliminated their 5-day-a-week print newspaper, launched a magazine, moved their operations entirely to the web, and have since launched a premium B2B content play. We're excited to have with us today two gentlemen who have served as key change agents in the Monitor's dramatic transformation to a multi-platform media company with the biggest audience in its history and ever stronger financial performance. Managing publisher Jonathan Wells is one of our two speakers today. Previously, before joining the Monitor, he was Director of Business Development. He was also Director of National Program Marketing for DC Public TV affiliate WETA, and he was VP of Strategic Marketing for Seattle Public Television. Welcome, Jonathan. Joining him is John Yema, editor of the Christian Science Monitor, who has been a foreign correspondent, a Washington reporter, political editor, and has covered economics, science, and culture in 38 years as a journalist. He's worked for the Dallas Morning News, the Boston Globe, UPI, the San Antonio Express News, and since 2008 has been editor of the Monitor. Also with us in the audience from the Monitor are Norm Williams, Head of Global Content Sales, and Matt Venture, New Ventures Director. And all four will be taking your questions at the tail end of what I know you will find to be a fascinating presentation about the Monitor's digital transformation. Please join me, Jonathan and John.
Thank you, Meg. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for inviting us to this wonderful event. And what Jonathan and I are going to do is take you through the process of change that the Monitor has been on for the past 5 years, how that happened, and what's important about it, what the dynamic was in that. You know, I heard, I think it was Ken was talking about how important networks are. Well, the Monitor has a very strong network. The Monitor was founded in 1908 and has a very strong network of foreign correspondents and national correspondents, not just on staff, but a larger group that we have relationships with. And that network has been built up over 105 years. That is our core asset. And that's something that you'll see we are leveraging in different and interesting ways. And we'll take you through that whole process. I also heard, I think it was Guy was talking about evolution. Well, the Monitor is all about evolution. So we'll take the Monitor from where we started in 2008. And Jonathan, maybe on this first slide, you can talk about how the Monitor has done.
Thanks, John. And let me just start by saying this is actually my first SIPA conference. And I arrived yesterday afternoon, got to meet many of you, and I've just been very impressed with the opportunity to talk with you, the quality of thinking, and the ideas that everybody's willing to share, and it's an honor and privilege to be here, so thank you very much. And I will come back for more. So go back a few years. We're all in the publishing business. It is a unique time. We have the digital onslaught. And while we're sort of a legacy news organization, many of us are facing similar issues. And the Monitor has had, by our boards, been given a mandate to meet certain financial objectives. And we look back a few years ago. People can see the slides there, good. And you can see we had gone through a process around 2006 we're just taking costs out of the organization. That's really what we're doing. And we forecast revenues going forward, and we said, this is not good. We are not going to make it.
That's the red line.
And we said, it is time of intense change. And you all know that change is very, very difficult. But the blue line is what happened over the last 5 years. And in fact, the Monitor has had its best financial year in the last 50 years. So we're starting to get traction. We have a long way to go and a lot to learn, but progress.
Okay, that's what happened. The Monitor, I told you it's an old organization. You know, I remember in rejoining the Monitor, I worked for them in the 1980s. In rejoining the Monitor, a colleague of mine in the news industry said, the Christian Science Monitor, wonderful news organization. I used to be a stringer for it, and my mother learned English. My grandmother learned English when she came over from the old country by reading it, and I think I read it in college, but what's it doing now? Well, the Monitor has been around, has established itself, but in some ways its reach, its quality didn't match, its reach didn't match its quality. And so the wonderful thing about the internet is it gave us the ability to overcome this reach problem. So we were able to leverage the internet and move through a process of ending our daily print newspaper. So if you look, when we decoupled our site from print, which was in the spring of 2009, we moved from 5 days a week in print to 1 day a week in print, but more importantly, we put our human resources behind the digital operation. Everything was web first. The digital monitor, csmonitor.com, is our core of news. And moved through a kind of a staff change process, a cultural change process within the staff, in which we had to learn new skills. We had to learn SEO, for instance, to patch that on to a legacy news organization where there's a lot of pride in being able to know what the story is and not necessarily to listen to what the audience is telling you the story is pretty difficult. So we had to just move through that. And then we learned different capabilities. Jonathan, maybe you could talk about those.
And just one note, a couple of things. One, John Yema came on in as editor in 2008 and had a skill, knowledge, and long-term outlook that was invaluable. Two, we did start driving analytics into the organization and into the newsroom, which was a culture shift, a significant culture shift, because what happened was that our journalists began to recognize, not only am I responsible for outstanding writing, but I'm responsible for an audience. And that was a huge, huge change. You see the slope here that it moved us really through a period of remarkable reach. We're currently doing about 12 to 14 million unique visitors per month, looking at 50 million page views. So that's a 10-time growth over the last several years. And what's happened, though, is that that's good, and there was some additional revenue coming out of that, significant additional ad-based revenue. But we also recognized that as we moved into the space, the pressure on CPMs from our ad revenue was increasing. And even though we had made remarkable change in 3 to 4 years, we couldn't stand still. And we recognized we had to move into new markets.
So that's what we're talking about now. We have the core monitor, that general news CS Monitor. We have a weekly print magazine. That's really for the generalists. That's for the thinkers, the people who are activists in their communities. We often talk now about monitor readers being people who think deeply, who share what they learn, and who do something about it, who often get involved in volunteer organizations. They write their congresspeople. They are those kind of activists. Around that core, though, we knew we needed to build these satellites that would be product extensions. So for instance, we have our political news out of Washington. We have a 9-member bureau in Washington, and they do strong political news out of Congress and elsewhere. So we packaged that specially into a product that we call DC Decoder. And that product has now attracted certain types of advertisers. We have certain kinds of demographics that are associated with that product, and it's actually changed the journalism that they're doing. It's a more of an iterative, listen to the audience, do what the audience is thinking type of news product. Jonathan, we've also done the sponsorable content in energy and environment, for instance.
That's right. So what was interesting to the organization was that we recognized we had made a significant investment in an amount of journalism and content that was of high quality, and that it would be possible to potentially move into new markets by taking what we were doing and adding just a few layers of additional knowledge or insight or precision about the content. And so that's really the process we've been engaged in. And I think our next slide shows that a little bit, John.
Right. This is basically, we're surrounding our core with these satellites that'll help us. You know, we just coined this term, content-scaping. What you have to do, what we did, and what I think you have to do in an organization that has strong content already, is understand what you produce, sift it, filter it, resort it, and then think about what you can do that is adjacent to it that will help to serve a specialized market. So that takes a lot of knowledge of and a lot of communication with your potential partners, your content partners or your sponsorship partners.
Right. And remember, for those of you that are in this room, probably some of this seems pretty fundamental, almost simplistic in terms of looking what you've got, what you're producing, assessing market opportunities, looking as to whether you could win in that particular market. But you're dealing with sort of a legacy news organization for whom this was a new way of thinking, and it required new types of talent and new ways of going about how we produce content. And so it also was a key lesson for us was that you don't always get it right the first time, and it requires a real iterative process to be successful. So we're learning how to do that.
That's a pretty big change in a news organization, because the traditional paradigm in news is we're smart, we produce it, we send it out there. Why isn't anybody buying it? Well, by listening to the market, we learn what they're buying, what they aren't buying, what they want. So, see, these are some of the factors that are critical to success. When you think about technology, I don't think there's any one technology that works, but I will say that there is a very important rule in technology to me, and that is to keep it simple, to make it WYSIWYG. You need to have content providers, content producers, people who are reporters, journalists. You need to have them doing their jobs. So you want your content, your technology to be the kind that is plug and play, the kind that somebody just sits down and understands it, is as intuitive as an Apple product or a WordPress blog. When you think about the people, you have to have a core of, you have to communicate your core values, what you stand for. So at the Monitor, we stand for thoughtful, humane coverage of international news. We have from 1908 forward, that's never changed. But the way in which we're publishing is changing. So we communicate that through our staff. Our staff understands that. And many of the people now that we use who are non-staff, who are out in remote parts of the world like Central Africa or Southeast Asia, who have a relationship with us because we're publishers, they understand our values too. So they understand the kind of journalism they should do for us. So those people, the core values that you communicate to your people are very important.
The other thing we did with people was we added, as I mentioned before, new talent. So on the publishing side, we traditionally had deep skill sets in circulation marketing, direct mail, direct response activity, et cetera. But we realized that we had to go further in that and actually bring in people who could help us understand markets and market dimensions and what that meant and how we would move into it. The other thing, John, you want to talk about data for a minute?
Yeah, we made sure that everyone in the organization saw as much data as possible. Donald Toole's in the audience. Donald was a strategic consultant that we worked with for a lot of this change, and Donald helped us to push the data, to actually analyze the data, to crunch it, to understand it more, and also to push it through the organization so everybody saw, every journalist saw, how they were performing, essentially.
And that real-time analytics enabled us to really keep a handle on what our audience was reading, what they were doing, and what the future opportunities were, which led to some key product innovation and some custom products.
So the custom products are where we'll really concentrate on as we move forward here. These are some of the people and skills. Jonathan and I won't talk about the digitally oriented editor or the innovative publisher.
Although we'd like to at great length, frankly.
Somebody else did the slide. But New Ventures Development is Matt Clark. Matt is over on the corner there, and Matt's a journalist with strong experience, especially in places like Africa. So in areas where we're opening up new B2B type of content plays, Matt, who also has an MBA, is a bridge between the journalistic culture and the business culture and can talk to the potential client too. So that's very valuable to us.
Also in the audience is Norm Williams, who had a strong background in both working for and partnering with major aggregators like LexisNexis, where he was employed at Newsbank. And of course, Donald Toole was a key part of the team. Other interesting little phenomena, there's two other people I'll shout out to. Abe McLaughlin, who was on our sponsorship and product development side, and Trevor Snork Yates. Both Abe and Matt started in the Monitor as journalists. Abe was in South Africa, covered most of the African continent for us, and then made this interesting transition of getting their MBAs, coming onto the publishing side, and helped us think through how to move forward.
Can't tell you, Meg and I were talking at lunch, and I can't tell you how important it is for journalists especially, for people who are in the content field, to have a business sense, whether they get it through a business curriculum or whether they retrofit it through. Jonathan and I and several other people at the Monitor have been through the Sulzberger program at Columbia. Very valuable program, but
Yep.
you know, and when you're thinking about new business models, you have to really think that way.
So the Monitor, as we said before, going through this process of analysis, the Monitor decided where can we begin to try to compete, where can we go deeper, and certain areas where we had fundamental content expertise started to emerge, and you see several of them on this page. But I want to talk about one in particular. Let's talk about politics. So if you're a general news organization, you're doing national news. And if you're doing national news, you're doing a subset of that called politics, or politics and policy. And we said we need to go further than that and start to define ourselves more distinctively in this arena, which led to, John, can we have the next slide? Something we called DC Decoder. This was a really interesting endeavor that Matt and Abe and others helped us work through, because we went through our data and we said, people that are actually reading our political coverage, what are they made for? And we said, what the data showed was that they're looking for explainers, quick explainers that are fast to absorb and quick to get. And we recognized that there was a service we could offer our readers, quickly explain key issues. And what was interesting about this is that started to attract, if you look at the Monitor audience, it's people interested in national and international news, but there's a subset, because we're trying to move forward with a sense of enabling people to think, share, and do. There's a subset of politically active citizens and socially responsible citizens, and they started to just hone in on DC Decoder. It was great because there's about 1 million of them coming to this particular section of the Monitor right now, and they are clicking through at 2 times the normal rate. Excuse me, the open rate is twice, and the click-through rate is 3 times the normal rate. And we're building a really, really engaged audience around this subset of national and political news.
Okay. One of the things we do with DC Decoder is we actually are listening to our audience and working with them. This is an interesting experiment, and I think we're going to use it elsewhere in the Monitor. We have a feature called You Pick, We Decide. So here's a list of stories. What would you like to have decoded in Washington, D.C.? You want to know about government spending? Do you want to know about political endorsements, why they matter? Tell us. You tell us, you vote on it, you read, and we produce an article. Having produced the article, then we email it to our readers. Now, that's not the only way we do business. That's, maybe 3% of the content we do. But it's it's not going to ever be 100% of what we do, but it's just an interesting new way of looking at journalism.
It was just a start for the Monitor, breaking down the push model of just pushing content out and starting to develop a real cycle of engagement. And what was interesting here is we had made some working assumptions about what we thought people would be interested in and started to present and test those. And what came back most interestingly is one of the key areas people wanted to know most about was the intersection of tax and spending. Where's our money actually going, and how's it actually being spent? I want to be really clear on that because it seems very confusing and I want to get it. So that became a real opportunity for us. The other thing, John, just to go back on that slide, obviously, along with this whole consumer engagement and to move to more professional audiences, the whole model for advertising was changing. And people were no longer just saying, okay, I'll buy your buttons and banners and that sort of thing. That model was eroding rapidly. And so we had to figure out new ways to integrate advertisers who basically were saying, we're tired of being on the outside. We want to appropriately be part of the conversation. And you can see here some examples of where we placed them against subject areas in which they had something they felt they needed to be said and would be useful for our audience.
So this is really a lot of the work that Norm and others have been doing. But
so, along with looking at the various financial models and market opportunities we've been discussing, we also were looking at the long-term trends on the B2B side and what we used to call syndication sales. It was sort of an aftermarket of whatever the current content was we were producing. And we looked at what was going to happen there, and we said, that's not good. And so we needed to create some change. And this is where Norm and Donald and Matt begin to help us address what do we do to reverse that line. And you can see we've had some significant success here in the last 3 or 4 years. So how has that happened? So remember, you were going to make this really short. Remember, you were a legacy news organization, and you're mainly sending out syndication feeds to ProQuest and LexisNexis, and that's only going so far. And when you go from a daily print to web first, those partners were worried about, well, how much content are we going to be getting, and what's the value of what you're producing? So we were able to put all of that daily web content in a PDF, and actually create a new feed that had more value. And then we went and said to our aggregation partners, let's come to new terms in how we do business, and let's do longer term agreements. And then we said, let's stop you guys being sort of just sales agents for us. Let's start to actually co-market, and the monitor will take some responsibility for actually demonstrating the value of monitored content into these secondary markets. And that worked very well. And then that led to, well, how do we work together to create actually new product, because the product line we have so far, we have to date, will only take us so far. So that's been a really interesting lessons learned in this space, which has led to new B2B products. And again, we were always going back to what are we doing now that we can add some level of additional insight or value that actually makes us be able to be of service to this market.
We have, just to jump in here, Jonathan, we have 170, we have a relationship with about 170, we have people in 170 countries and relationships with about 200 journalists around the world. So that's the kind of asset that helps us do things like a risk report or a world report or look at frontier markets more closely. And this is where we're actually building out a lot of our capabilities now.
So this first one, John, and let's go to the next slide. So this first one is, okay, I'm a CEO, I'm standing on the balcony, and I'm looking out, and I'm trying to figure out the territory I'm going to navigate. I need very insightful information as to my global and political risks. And can you deliver that to me effectively and efficiently?
By the way, this is a feed. This is not a print publication.
That's right. And this is being sold by one of our aggregator partners into the marketplace now. The next one is, okay, I'm not quite on the balcony. I'm a little bit lower. I'm an operational risk manager, and my company is wants to investigate in a particular market, and I'm the guy or gal who's got to make the call. So tell me about political risk, investment risk, operations risk, and security risk, and how should I assess this? So again, just leveraging that deep international expertise and adding on some additional value. So what we've talked about to date is the monitor's move in terms of serving new markets. And in the last two examples of new markets, we've talked about products that the monitor is creating and handing off to a major aggregator, and they are taking the marketing responsibilities. But we also began to look at the fact that if the monitor really is going to make it, it has to be in the mode of being able to directly sell into certain key markets ourselves. And so we are moving into that over the summer and looking at markets that have high volatility, but very high opportunity. Some people call them frontier markets. And so we've been working intensely to develop a competitive product in that. It will roll out over the course of the summer, so stay tuned. You'll hear more about it.
So just to basically give you a summing up of where we've been over this past 5 years, the most important thing was that we broke down the wall between editorial and publishing. And that happened because Jonathan and I have that kind of a relationship where we work together on this because we know that we've got to develop a business model that works. We can't afford to just sit in different silos. I think that's happened throughout our organization. We have people talking to one another, working collaboratively. We also, we're mindful of the ethical constraints within journalism, so we're very careful. We negotiate things, but instead of just saying no, business can't talk to editorial, which was the old way of doing it, we say, let's figure out a way to talk about it. Let's figure out a way to work through this.
And frankly, for all of you that are managers, you recognize that demonstrated practice filters down. So John and I tried to set the example of appropriate collaboration on these issues. We asked our marketing and senior editors to do the same thing, and that got filtered down. And actually, a lot was going on underneath us that we weren't even aware of that was really effective. They were sometimes way ahead of us. But it was a shift in culture and an attempt to say, we have to survive. How are we going to do it? Let's work together. Can I just touch on one other point?
Yeah.
So the other dynamic that was a huge shift was we had been talking to consumers and pushing stuff to them, and we realized that wasn't going to work. You saw that in DC Decoder. And we also, in addition to a new way of thinking about the relationship with the customer, was a new way of thinking about vendor partners and the collaboration there?
So within the newsroom, you sort of, and I think this is true of any organization that has a lot of expertise and has already done something successfully for a while, but is going through a change, you have to expect resistance. You have to see that as a normal thing and actually a good thing, because resistance helps you road check, helps you determine whether the things you're experimenting with are going to work. Journalists are great skeptics. We hire them to be skeptics. That's good. It may, every once in a while, it may make you kind of uncomfortable, but you have to go through the process. You have to empathize with them when they're going through this fairly wrenching change from we produce this news, we send it out, and somebody should be reading it, to why is nobody reading my content? Maybe there's a way I should be writing it differently. You have to empathize, and you have to listen to them, but you can't stop in this process of change. And then you have to really persistently invest everybody in success, and that means showing the metrics throughout the organization, being transparent about the finances, letting people know if there's a dark cloud on the horizon, letting them know if we're actually doing fairly well, too. So we try to do that within the organization. We've done that for the past few years. And I think, as Jonathan may have pointed out, I think the results speak for themselves. Our traffic is up significantly, 10-fold, really, since we began. And our revenue is up significantly. We've had the best year financially since 1965 for the Monitor. We're on a path. Thank you. We're on a path to, we're a nonprofit that's been in a deficit situation. We're on a path, just like SIPA, to break even very soon in the next few years. And, but we're doing that because the way we have to do that is by evolving, because we know that whatever we've been doing for the past 105 years is going to be different the next year or two or 105 years, and we expect to be around another 105 years.
Can I just make one other comment, John? So John just made a really important point about this vision of success. I mean, there's a huge amount of trial and error, trial and learning, trying to become a learning organization, but the degree that we've been able to some degree, paint a vision of success and recognize that common boat that we're all in has been really instrumental into moving forward. And so it's been a great journey. We've got a long ways to go, but it's been exciting.
Meg, do we have enough time for a few questions? Okay, anybody want to ask a question? And if we've got a microphone in back.
Also, we can ask questions of some of our subject matter experts in the audience also. In the back, on the left here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So you mentioned you were working with a very large content aggregator. You're obviously not a very large organization. Can you walk me through how that worked? I would think that would be a real challenge to get them to change what they were doing.
In terms of the business relationship with the Monitor, or how we were working with them in terms of product creation, or both?
Let's talk about business relationship.
Sure. And Norm, do you want to? Can Norm get a mic here, and he can give a 1-minute answer to that? Norm handled the negotiation of these relationships, so
He'll make it clear we won't. So
I'd worked for 2 major aggregators before, so I knew them inside and out. And I knew that the Monitor content was highly valuable, more valuable than the amount of royalties we were getting for it. So the way we approached it is we retold our story about our content, how our growth in content, which actually has increased over the past 6-7 years, and went through a process of creating a partnership with them. Part of that process was an RFP, and a very long one. And it was not something unwelcome to them, but in the end it was a great tool to educate both them on the value of our content and educate us on what the aggregators do for us. And the result was we became partners. They ended up recognizing our value and giving us much higher minimum guarantees than we'd ever had. So in a nutshell, that's how it worked for us. Now, we're not The Economist. We don't get those kinds of royalty fees, but we were able to increase our fees, royalties, 300, 400%.
Thank you, Norm.
there was a question back in this area, I think.
over here.
Okay.
Hi, you guys make a really great team. My question was on transparency. We do that in my organization. However, what I've discovered is there's this sort of panic when they don't have this immediate gratification of seeing positive news. And I was just wondering how you manage that. You know,
Yeah.
is it more of a leadership cheerleader type of style you take on when you sort of show them the vision of the future?
Well, I think that's a great point, because when journalists see how their stories are performing or aren't performing, it's true. They can interpret that in a way that may be positive. They may need to change their behaviors in some ways, or how they write. But it can be very negative too. They can think, you know, nobody's reading me, and this is not good, and I'm going down the tubes, and maybe I'm going to be judged on this. So what we try to do is use metrics as a tool, but not as a cudgel. You know, we're not going around telling people that their performance. In fact, what we try to do is move people into positions so that they can be optimized in what they do. And it turns out that there are some people who are very good, including, this may surprise you, not just young people who are good at SEO-based, short, fast, snappy articles, which is almost the cliche in the industry, right? So, some of our older writers, one in particular, one of our Washington writers, is actually our page view champion, and it's because he writes these very intelligent and witty blog posts. So by moving people, and then there are certain writers who are very good at long-form journalism, so we try to track them into the kind of content that we do for our weekly magazine. The great thing about that kind of content, which we think of as core monitor content, you know, what's behind the gun violence, that's a deep monitor type of article. We can then link to that article with our shorter, faster articles. So we're trying to put it all together. We try to produce the deeper, stronger monitor articles with people who really know how to do that, and then we try to point to those with the faster, more popular articles. And yes, it is a kind of a leadership thing. You know, you have to sort of stay steady on the idea that everybody's going to see everything, but you also have to allow people or help people understand that this is not the only way in which they're judged.
You can see the agility that we're asking of the newsroom. You know, write short articles that get attention and traction. At the same time, some of you have to produce long-form journalism for the weekly magazine. Understand analytics. I mean, it's quite a new world for these folks that are writing every day.
I don't think we've done a single Kardashian article, though.
So as a follow-up to that, was there a large-scale change-out in terms of skill sets to more entrepreneurial or the writers who could really understand the connection with the marketing and the content marketing aspects of it?
You know, there was a sorting of skill sets. There was a sorting of personnel. You know, people shifted into different jobs. When we moved from daily print to weekly print, that we eliminated a lot of production positions, and people understood that. You know, you no longer needed as many people to produce a weekly product as you do a daily product in print. But mostly, we just helped people through this process. I mean, it's been, you saw how the curve went up over time. And for instance, the first year was figuring out just how to do web-first journalism, what that meant for us. The second year, by the beginning of the second year, we began to really get into search engine optimization. And we did training sessions, we did conversations, we worked with specialists, and everybody learned SEO, and everybody continues to think about SEO. And then we began to build multipliers, because we realized, I mean, we basically told everybody that we've got to survive somehow, and that this is the best case. And you know, at one point I think I sort of likened it to, here we were in 2008, we had to kind of push off from the dock, right? And there were some people on the boat who were looking back longingly at the port, but the port was in flames. You know, the old newspaper idea, the old way of publishing is really dying. The internet is totally disrupting it. Mobile's disrupting whatever the internet first didn't disrupt. And so we're dealing with that, and I think everybody understood that. I mean, that sounds like a dire forecast is what motivated people, but I think everybody saw the same writing on the same wall. And, you know, we tried to give people the tools to work through it.
And looking forward, if you say, well, okay, now we need to look at the potential of writing effectively for a professional audience and say risk and international risk, there's some folks that go, I would love to do that. That's going to require me to develop a new set of skills and go deeper in certain aspects. So again, you can create a vision where people go, I'm on board with that.
And just a moment about risk. There's a, you think about, this is not just supply chain risk, although that's important, but when you're thinking about risk, you're also thinking about reputation risk. The Monitor is all about human rights. As, if you read us, you know what we stand for. Humane treatment of people. When you think about the collapse of the factory in Bangladesh, and you think about what happens, not just to those people, but what happens when companies aren't thinking sufficiently about what's happening overseas in areas in frontier markets, you realize that the Monitor uniquely has a role in that. The Monitor's role is to help foster better practices around the world by looking at the problems of risk. So that's the way we're thinking about that. I think you had a...
Meg, how are we doing on time?
One last.
Okay.
We've got plenty of time.
All the time you want, Ken.
It's a quick one. I mean, every single news organization has cut back their international correspondence. How have you been able to buck the trend? And how many full-time international correspondents do you have on your payroll as opposed to stringers?
Exactly. So we also have reduced our foreign correspondents. I think we probably had 6 of them, 6 full-time foreign correspondents. A number of contractual relationships were almost full-time staffers. But a place like Beijing, you've got to have a full-time staffer. You can't have a freelancer. That's just the rule. But in places like, Central Africa, we have a lot of stringers and we have people on contract. So we reduce the number, because those are so costly, we reduce the number, but frankly, that's our competitive advantage. No, we have Paris, we have Jerusalem, we have in Istanbul, we have a guy who's a specialist on the Middle East and on Iran, written a great book on Iran. We have Beijing.
Yep.
And then we have a big Washington bureau. We have a contractor in Moscow who's practically staff. We have about 5 or 6 other contractors around the world. So effectively, we have probably 10 people who are full-time correspondents, and we have our national staff.
So expensive, but part of what you're trying to do to compete.
Meg said I could ask the last question. What about your audience? It must have changed. Did you consciously go towards an audience, or did you pull your existing audience along, or did you know where you were going, or has it just sort of happened going?
Pardon me? Okay, so if you stand back, we did do a lot of research on our existing consumer market and looked at subsets of that, including the politically active citizen and the socially responsible citizen. So if you look at the brand position now of movement of thought and action, which is what the Monitor is all about, and enabling people to think, share, and do, we applied that to 3 core markets. One core market was politically active citizens and consumers. Another tier of markets was what we call thought leader and DC activists. And a 4th one was international professionals and operational risk managers. And we've said we need to align our organization to serve those 3 core markets very, very effectively and have a point of differentiation around think, share, and do that actually is compelling and leads people to higher levels of engagement with the Monitor and hopefully a sound financial future.
Thank you. Thank you
It's
very
been great
much.
to be here.
Thank you.